Hey guys, welcome to another video of analyzing these games that I played today. And this is once again from me playing on the black side against one of our chess club members. So, white plays e4, pretty standard. And I play this g6. This is called the modern, right? So in the modern, my goal is not really, so this opening is really hard to play because we're going against these opening principles, as you'll see, right? We're not controlling the center. We're just developing, we're getting quickly castled, we're trying not to interfere with the center just yet. So you notice I'm just developing d6, getting the bishop out slowly, right? Knight and now bishop. Right, so now this comes a point where I'm threatening to take, queen takes, and bishop takes d4. So that's my goal. Now my opponent plays it plays h3. Now I get this chance. In this case, white has to capture with g takes in order to protect this pawn. But queen takes happens, and I play bishop takes d4. Now an interesting try here is actually e5, because you have the queen threats here, you have maybe the pawn threat, maybe the bishop comes out to try to get this pawn, right? So this might have been a confusing move, but I think even just knight up, or after bishop takes, queen takes, jack takes, knight d7, bishop b5, knight f6, and it's all protected. So I think it should be fine there, but that was definitely a tricky variation. So white played bishop e3, understandably, to develop the piece, control the center, and try to shoo this bishop away, right? You see it's a very strong diagonal, so it's very clear to get this bishop away. So I retreat because I like my bishop. And it's fianchettoed. This is what you call it when you don't develop it here. You develop it here, you call it a fianchettoed bishop, right? It's kind of like a kettle. Kettle goes out the back door. So that's how I like to think of it. Bishop c4, good. Now threatening the checkmate, right? So what I did was I played e6, preventing it. Castles, knight d7. Now I'm threatening this fork, right? And I want to try to trade off this bishop because it's really strong in targeting. And maybe later he can bring this pawn up the board, right? So all that's possible. Rook d1. And now here I debated one of two options. Either I go for the fork right away and trade it off, or I develop my piece. And I figured it's more important to develop the piece and worry about the trade later. So I played knight out. Now bishop d4 comes on the board. My opponent recognizes that this bishop is strong. That's a really good move on this part. So I play knight e5. At the same time, I do fork the two pieces, but I also prevent this bishop from trading. So takes, takes. I keep my good valuable bishop. So that's what I wanted. Queen there. Castles. Now, I'm not sure, but it looked to me like Rook d3 didn't have much of a plan in it, right? So in this case, I think I could go for a few plans. f4 maybe, followed by Rook d2, Rook f2, and try to pressure this push. Or you could swing the knight here and then secure this push. But either way, since your pawns are pointing this way, right, you want to start playing on this side because you see this square is really important because although I'm covering it right now, if you attack, this is the square you want to attack. So rook d3 didn't do much, so I immediately went back to prevent from my opponent getting a tempo to attack the bishop immediately. So now queen g3. Decent, I like the idea. Maybe queen h4, right? So a6. Now I was planning b5, and now because of this awkward placement of the rook, the bishop can no longer go back there, right? So I thought maybe if he goes back here, maybe I can push and get the fork on these two squares, right? So that was my goal. Queen h4, and now I get in this push. And now you see this fork is unstoppable because rook here, here. Now this bishop is trapped, right? So this is really strong on my part. Rook e1, and now I get c4 in. Takes, takes, knight c6. Now e5, right? So notice it's really hard for beginners to see that this queen is hanging because, sometimes when you're thinking, you just don't cover a part of the board. And so it's really important to take a glance at the whole board. See, like, when you're here, when your opponent makes this move, you want to think, why did my opponent make this move? Is there any piece that's threatened, right? So, as I said, it's like a process of elimination. It's like, is this piece being threatened? No. Is this piece being threatened? And just like keep going. Usually you start from your most valuable pieces because you don't want to lose them. So in this case, you'd easily detect that this queen wants to trade with this queen. So okay, e5, didn't see it, but I did give my opponent a chance here. d5, takes, a4. Now, my threat is this pawn, right? So immediately when you're going through the process of elimination, you should see somewhere in your process that this pawn is being threatened. So f4 would have been probably the best move to support the pawn. But okay, a4 happened, b4 came down here, I took the pawn, rook d3, swiped it out, cleaned the sheets, just did everything, knight d4, and now bishop e5, right? So this is extremely tricky. Takes, a5, just protected the pawn, and rook c3. I'm threatening this pawn, I'm threatening this pawn, threatening the knight, getting the rook in, going for checkmate. That was my goal, pretty much. So, what happened in this game was I wasn't really controlling the center, right? But getting this pawn was really important for me because my opponent previously held that square. But say, for example, if bishop e3 here to keep this pawn going, then I would have had to develop more slowly. I would have played knight here, try to get this push in, try to get the knight here, but it's a little bit slower. But this made my job easier, right? Knight's out, knight's out, and I practically won because, white didn't really advance, right? It never happened. And meanwhile, I was going at it with my plan. So, in the middle game, it's all about planning, right? You've developed your pieces to a certain position, but you want to know where they best fit. So you might want to do some imagination work. You might want to think about, okay, where is the ideal square to put my pieces, right? So you could think about the pawn pushing here. You could think about the knight going here, right? and trying to attack this, you could think about the pawn formation, right? Since white is playing on this side, maybe that was a plan to discuss. And I would say maybe the main reason I won was in the opening I got that square, the important pawn, and then here it was just a matter of fact that my opponent didn't really have a plan, so I was able to execute this easy pawn maneuver and get these pieces.